Thank you for tuning into this video. This is an introduction video to Martinus and his work. The channel here is based on the work of Martinus, so I think it's appropriate to make a video about who Martinus was, what his work is, and how you can find it in today's world. There are plenty of opportunities to get in touch with his work, so I will give you some practical hints on how to do that. I have divided the video into two parts. So the first part is about Martinus and his work. Who was he as a person? What is the organization around? What is going on today? Just to give you an idea. And I think questions like, is this a cult? Is this a guru? Or what is it? And I will provide you answers to some of those questions. And secondly, I will introduce the world picture very, very briefly, give some of the characteristics about it, what is special about it, what is the contribution of Martinus. And that's essentially what all the videos is about. So I'll just give you the very brief ideas about what Martinus world picture is and talk a little bit about why it's an eternal world picture. And that's the name of the channel. So I find that interesting to put into this video. I've made chapters in the description, and I think they pop up in different ways on YouTube, so you can jump around and find what you are interested in. And before we start all of that, I will say a little bit about myself as well. Not that I'm that particularly interesting as a person, but I'll just say I have an academic education. I have a PhD, so I have been very interested in theory of science. I did it in IT, but it was really important to know theory of science. Theory of science is science about what science is. So I had a whole chapter about that in my thesis back in the days. I've been interested in what is the world and how can we know about it. That's sort of the essence in theory of science. So I've been working as an IT person, as developer, and later as a manager in different positions. And right now I'm actually teaching IT. And I've known Martinus' work since I was 17. And I started out just by reading it for some years. Really didn't talk much about it to anyone. But later I become more part of the practical side of things, what is organized around Martinus and his works today. So I've been helping out with some IT work and other things. And I've attended courses, lectures, and so forth. And I have also been working as part of what is called Martinus Institute a couple of times, where I also got paid for that. But anyway, that's not important here. What is important here is that I've known it for quite a long time, and quite recently actually I also started teaching Martinus cosmology as his world picture at Martinus Institute and Martinus Center Klint. So I'm a member of our teaching group where we help each other out and have the whole group that actually do quite a lot of the teaching. Finally, as you can hear, I have an accent. I'm Danish. I live in Copenhagen, and this is actually where Martinus Institute is located. Martinus was Danish, so his original work is written in Danish. So I've been fortunate enough to actually read the original work in Danish. Fortunately, quite a lot of the work is translated to English today, so you can read it as well. Enough about me. Let's get into the video, the main bulk of it. But before we start, as I said, there are chapters that you can use to move around in the video as you like. I've picked out what I thought was important for someone who was interested in Martinus and his work without really knowing anything. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them below and I'll be happy to answer them as good as I can. And if there are some really important topics that I've missed or I need to elaborate, I'll probably do another video about that. And if you feel for it, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow. So please do that. It really makes a difference. Thank you in advance for that. So this is the first part of the video, and I will start out by talking a bit about who Martinus was. Then I will talk about what he actually did, his work, what he has left all of us, so we can read and listen to him and things like that. And then I will talk about what we call, in Danish we call it sagen. I don't know exactly how to translate it, but that's essentially what's around today. And I will explain why it's called that. You might translate it to the course. But we'll get back to that and why that's a little bit tricky to translate, at least for me as a Danish speaker. So who was Martinus? He was born in 1890 in a little town called Sindal in Denmark, which is in the part of Denmark called Jylland. And it was in the northern part of Jylland. So that was very primitive back then. He obviously knew his mother. His father is not well known. There was a rich guy who probably was his father, but couldn't put his name to it, so someone else was called his father. So he didn't really have a family on the farm where he was born. So he got to be raised at some other part of his family. Not necessarily poor condition, but very quite primitive. They lived in one house, and in one end they were living, and in the other end there were cows and chickens and so forth. And he had a very limited schooling. It was only a couple of times during the week he was in school. The rest of the time he was out working, and maybe a little bit more, I think it was during the winter, whatever. He wasn't really that well educated. He grew up as a child, and when he was around 12, 13, something like that, he started working. And when he got a little bit older, he had different types of jobs. He worked at a dairy, the guys who make milk and butter and those kind of things. And at some point he moved to Denmark. He never got married or anything. And at some point in his life, he was starting to think maybe there's something more to life than the job he had at that point. He was staying in an office and just crunching numbers the whole day. That's what you did back then because you didn't have computers, right? So at some point, a colleague of him asked if he wanted to borrow a book about meditation. And long story short, what happened was that Martinus got his hands on this book and he sat down in a chair. It's still around, that chair. And he was meditating. He was meditating on God, and he got some spiritual experiences that he has actually quite elaborate described later on. But the long and short of it, these experiences gave you what he has called intuition in a permanent way. So essentially what intuition can do for you, or for what it did for Martinus, according to himself, was essentially that he could think about a question and then the answer came. So the first thing he was thinking about was essentially, what was the moon? What is the moon? An answer appeared in his mind that the moon was essentially a Earth corpse. So based on this new ability he got through these spiritual experiences, he started in the beginning just figuring out what he had to ask questions in order to get the answers, or he had to think about the questions in order to get the answers, and he couldn't ask about anything. He couldn't ask about specific people or something, but he could ask about essentially what the solution to the mystery of life was. So he got that. And what he also got was this input, in lack of a better word, that he should write it down in a way where he continued and explained what was already in the big religions like Christianity. But he should write it down in a way so people like us could actually understand it. With religions, it's mostly about having a faith and believing what is being said by authorities, but this should be different. This should be a way that we could actually get an explanation about what life was. So that was sort of his life mission, to do that. So he lived the rest of his life in Copenhagen, and he spent the last 60 years of his life writing down all the information or the facts that he got. And in the beginning, he actually thought that someone else should write it, but he got this personal friend of his that was asking a lot of questions, and that someday he started writing down by himself, and he found out that he should write it all down by himself. So that was what he did. So that's a bit about what the story of Martinus was, essentially what his life was. But who was Martinus, you can ask. And there are people obviously who has known him. He knew quite a lot of people. And there has also been some interviews with people who knew him. So we actually have quite a lot of people stating things about who Martinus was. And it seems to, and I know people who have known him from they were small kids in the 50s and up until he died, obviously. And who has talked about him. So he seems like a generally very nice person, friendly, never got angry, those kind of things. And that's also part of his world picture. But what I will say, and what I will also come a little bit more back to, is that he was not really interested, although he got all this knowledge, high knowledge about what the world essentially is, he didn't want any kind of personal worship. The important thing here was his work, basically. So it was not becoming a guru or anything, and there's no ceremonies or anything in this area. And before I go into what his actual work was in the last 60 years of his life, there's one important thing here to say about him, and that's his education. As I said in the beginning, he wasn't really that educated in a way. Nothing to do with him, that was just the circumstances. So it's not like he had a long academic or philosophical or anything like that kind of education. I think he had a little bit of Bible study growing up, but he didn't know Steiner or those kind of things, any other spiritual way of seeing life, basically. Point here being that it all came from himself. All the things that he's writing about basically came from himself, because he couldn't get it from anywhere else. And he's also telling that in the beginning, if he tried to read another book, he just got a huge headache, and he kind of implies that that was a way to prevent him from reading anything else. So he had to come up. Firstly, he kind of got the answers, but he had to come up with a way to describe it and explain it. I'll come a little bit more back to that during I talk about his work. And let's get to his work now. This section is about the work of Martinus. So as I stated in the previous chapter in this video, Martinus got this spiritual experience, and he could start understanding the world and sort of the eternal part of the world. So what actually came out of this understanding? In the beginning, he had to figure out how to write things. He started making lectures and so forth. And over the years, he has written quite a lot of books, made symbols, have lectures, written a lot of letters. There's a lot of images of him. There have been taped conversations and so forth. I'll just give you a brief overview of it. But firstly, obviously, he was Danish. And as I said, and this is not to put him down in any way, he didn't have a huge education. So the only language he could speak was Danish. So everything, all the original work is written in Danish. But we are so fortunate that there are some translators who are working really hard and thorough to actually get his Danish work translated into English. And quite a lot of it is already translated. So it's available. And as another good news is that it's actually available online. So you can go into Martinus Institute's homepage, martinus.dk/en for English. And in there you can actually find, or on that page you can actually find the works published, and you can actually read it for free if you want to. So let's dig into what the work actually is. So the main work of Martinus is what he called the Book of Life. And he has also stated that he wants the Danish version of that, which is Livets Bog. But just for the ease of things, I will just call it the Book of Life. And the Book of Life is 7 volumes. I have one of them here. It's not in the best condition, but it's here. And you can see some of the symbols here as well on the books. I haven't asked for copyright, so I cannot show them in a real good condition. Maybe I'll do that later. But anyway, so he wrote these books, and it's in 7 volumes. And the first one here came in 1932. And he got his spiritual big experiences in 1920-21. So it took him more than 10 years to get this first book published. And after that, he got the next 6 one. So there are 7 volumes in total, 2,500 pages. And that's the main part of his work. What's special about these books is that there's a lot of explanations. So if you wanna, of course, he describes the world picture in the books here, in the Book of Life books, but this is also where you find all the main arguments in his work. So he's not just, I mean, he got these experiences from his intuition, and his work was essentially to put it down in a way so someone like us with the experience that we have, we don't have the same kind of intuition. Intuition is not this gut feeling, or some people talk about. Intuition is really something that comes into your spiritual or mental part of you and gives you a fact. And he says that the day where you get that on a permanent basis, as we have with our eyes, where we can open and close them, and we can open and close, so to speak, our intuition, that's where we can really start to see this world picture. And that's what he got. Anyway, so his work was basically to take these experiences he had, this knowledge he had, and write it down in a way so we could actually understand it, so we could actually relate to it. So he had to find ways where what he wrote was something that could get in contact with what experience we already have. So that's one part of it. And the other part of it is to make it in a way where it's logical. So there's a lot of this. You can also see there's a Christ kind of feature at the front here. So there are also some religious aspects of it. He doesn't need the First and the Second Testament, or the Old and the New Testament, but he is referring to it. And the idea in these books is to explain it in a logical way. So that was the whole mission for him, to write this down. He says there's a lot of truth in both the Old and the New Testament, and but his mission was to make it in a way where you can understand it. You can check it yourself. You need a little bit of intelligence. He says you don't need that much, actually. There are other things that are more problematic. So he wrote the Book of Life, Livets Bog. He wrote a couple of other big books. He wrote a lot of these smaller, minor books. That's a lot of articles. I think he had written 300 of them. And the topics are a lot of different things. It can be about food, prayer, society, sexuality, you name it. Essentially, all the questions he got from people inspired him to sit down, figure out, analyze things, get these intuition thing, or however it worked. And then he wrote down whatever could help us. He was really here to help us. But before he actually wrote anything, he made these symbols. So that was actually where he started to get an overview of what the world was. Because he did get the facts, but just getting it all put in the right places. And there's an early notebook of his where you can see that there are different areas that he hadn't completely nailed down from day one. So it's important to say that these books are not something that are channeled or anything, where he kind of just wrote down what got into his mind. So he kind of got the facts, but he still had to do a lot of work to actually sit down and put it in writing and put the explanation in the books. So that was the books. There are 100 symbols. They are described in what we call the symbol books, or the Eternal World Picture. That's the books where all the symbols are described. There are 6 of them in Danish, and a couple of them that are translated into English, so you can actually read them. And there he goes over essentially an easier way to get into Martinus and his work. It's kind of an introduction. So where the Book of Life can be quite heavy, some of the sentences can literally be like a page where you just go on and go on and go on and go on. This is written a little bit later in his life, and it's more accessible in some ways. Personally, I started with the Book of Life, so you can do that. It's not a problem. But the other ones are more introductory in some ways. Then he held a lot of lectures. Unfortunately, they are still in Danish only. They are being transcribed at the moment, and I'm sure at some point they will actually get out there written down. there are also some really interesting stuff in there. So that's his work. There's around 10,000 written pages. I don't know, 200-300 lectures, 300 articles, something like that. You can get the books if you want them physically. Go in on shop.martinus.dk. I'll link it in the description as well, and you can get it there. And Martinus Institute will sell them. You'll have to pay something for them, but they have there if you want it on paper. So in this chapter, I will go into the more practical stuff with Martinus and his work. And the first thing I will talk about is how are things actually organized. And what is quite interesting with this is that you cannot be a member of anything here. And Martinus was very forceful on that because he didn't want anyone to be inside of his work and some people outside. So the whole idea is that this is for everyone who is interested in it. And he also states in the beginning of the Book of Life, Livets Bog, that his whole world is a big defense for every living being. So this is for everyone, whether people are interested or not. So he didn't want membership, basically. And the reason for that is that you cannot be part of it and not part of it. We are by definition all part of it, membership or not. So you cannot become a member. So there are no who are members and no who are not members. But of course there are some people who are more interested in this than others. So in that sense they are more close to the kernel or the center of this cause or this thing that is going on around Martinus. So no membership, that's really important to say. It's not a new religion. That's not the point of all this. The work is called the Third Testament, but that's more like because it's a continuation and it's not a repetition of what was in the first two testaments. This is the third one. It's a new one. It's 2,000 years after the second one, the New Testament. So it's completely different. And Martinus writes quite a lot about it. And I'll only say it's a scientific way of explaining what was in the First and Second Testament. The point here is that it's not a religion. If it is anything, it's a science, it's a spiritual science, it's about some of the physical world, but it's not. I mean, Martinus leaves all the materialistic research to what's already there because he says they're doing really good, so there's no reason for that. But he says we have a knowledge about the materialistic world, but so we can actually behave well in that part of the world. But he also says there's also a spiritual or mental reality that we have to learn to behave in as well. And that's the science that he's describing. That's what he's saying. So he calls it a spiritual science. So yeah, there are religious topics in a way, but they are dealt with in a different way than what Martinus will call faith-based religion, where you have to have a faith in authorities and you don't really need the logic and all the explanation. So it's not a religion. There are no ceremonies. There are no memberships. You can be kicked out because you cannot get in, and you cannot get in because there's nothing really to get into. So no membership. You can read it. You can take what you want and you can leave the rest. It's completely free in that way, and Martinus literally states that. So if there's something you find strange, difficult, weird, where you have another opinion, perfectly fine. If you want to go for some other religion or are convinced about something else, go and do that. That's really not a problem. That's also in the introduction to the Book of Life. And it's just a really important point that this is not some totalitarian system where everyone has to know about Martinus and his works. It's an opportunity that you can read and you can learn about what his world picture is, the eternal world picture, and you can take what you want and leave the rest, basically. So then you can ask how many people are actually interested in this stuff right now. And it's obviously quite difficult to say because there's no membership, so you cannot count it. But you can get some ideas about how many there are just by how many do you have in Facebook groups, how many do attend courses and so forth. So the estimate is about 10,000 people, maybe something like that. Again, it's really difficult to say. As I said in the beginning of the video, I was reading this completely on my own for 7-8 years. No one knew about it, and I know about people who has had the same for decades basically. So it's really difficult to say. We usually say, with a little bit of a fun thing, that Martinus is the best public kept secret in Denmark. Said in another way, Martinus is not very well known. When I start talking about it, it's quite often that people don't know who Martinus is. So he's a public person. You can get the books on the public libraries and all that. There's no secrets or anything, but he's just not very well known. And that's how it is right now. And maybe that will change. So just to give you an idea about how big this is, 10, maybe 20,000 people. Most people are in Scandinavia. That's Denmark, it's Norway, and it's Sweden. There's a little bit English speaking, not that much, and a little bit German and so forth. But it's like a handful, maybe 100 people in a country at the most. So it's not really widespread right now. So that was a bit about what the course is, but there are also a physical or more practical, even more practical part of this. And the thing I would like to talk about is the Martinus Institute that's located in Frederiksberg in Copenhagen. I live 10 minutes from it basically. Anyway, this was where Martinus lived from 1945, something like that, until he died in 1980. And that was where most of the stuff from there on until he died and until recently, most of the stuff that actually happened with administration, getting books out and so forth. They also have a lecture hall, and Martinus gave a lot of his lectures there. I actually gave a lecture there myself the other day. So it's still quite active. There are study groups in there. Yeah, and Martinus has lived most of a great part of his life in there. And in 1935, back then they wanted a place to meet outside of Copenhagen. So they found an area, a place called Klint, which is also, it's on the island called Zealand in Denmark. 1 hour drive from Copenhagen, basically, in car. And he established that in 1935. Today, I would say that's probably the main teaching place for Martinus. And you can actually go there and you can stay there for a longer period of time if you want to. There's a summer season. It's 6 weeks, and the last 2 weeks are international weeks. So if you want to go there with your English, you can go there for a couple of weeks, and there will be English lectures, study groups, and the lectures that are not in English, they will be translated. So that's a real good opportunity to actually go to Denmark and meet others who are interested in Martinus' works if you want to do that. So that's the physical part of it, but I will also talk a little bit about how it's actually run. There is a foundation Martinus gave all his belongings to, basically, including his work. So he spent the last 10 years of his life talking with what was the board of that foundation organization back then, and they recorded all the meetings they had when they spoke about this, in order to make a structure for the future of his course or saying. And they have 3 purposes, basically, that they have to do, and that's only what they have to do. They have to ensure that the work is preserved. So that's keeping all the originals, or I mean, I've seen the paper he was writing on a typewriter, so all the original manuscripts are still around, so you can go back and actually take that everything is Martinus' original words if you want to. So that's really important. And then they have to publish the work, and they do that, and they do it in Danish, and they do it in other languages as well. And the third part is they have to have teaching activities. And that happens at Martinus Institute, and that happens at Clint. And that's the only two places Martinus Institute is actually responsible for the things. Then there are other activities, you can call them private or non-Martinus Institute activities. They happen in Denmark, around the country, and there's quite a lot in Sweden, and I guess there's also quite a lot in Norway, and there are small study groups around the world. And there are, and obviously most of them are in the local language, but you can also join online study groups. Martinus Institute has one. And back in the days, 50s, 60s, something like that, some of the people who worked with Martinus had this idea that this new fantastic world picture should be all around the world, and Martinus Institute should actually be the one who kind of took care of this, organized the whole thing. But at the end, Martinus came to the conclusion, no, Martinus Institute just have to have a very specific task, and that's the three I mentioned: preserve the works of Martinus, publish it, and do the teaching at Martinus Institute in Copenhagen and the Martinus Center in Clint. And that's it. And then everyone else could go out and do essentially what they want, like I do right now. That's part of it. This is not Martinus Institute work I'm doing right now. This is on my own, so everyone can do what I want right now, or can do what I do right now. In some ways, it's a small place. There are 6-7 people hired, something like that, and they have a lot of stuff to do. A lot of functions are actually going on at Martinus Institute. Then I need to talk a little bit about that. So who is actually in charge of all this? Who is running this? And Martinus ended up with a structure where there is a council and kind of a board for the whole thing, and they're responsible for the three things I mentioned. And they had long discussions in the 70s about how to organize this, and they were talking about democracy, and there should be employed representative in the board and so forth, because that was what you had back then. And they ended up with something I find kind of intriguing and kind of genius in some ways. So there are essentially 7 board members. 5 of them are full board members, and 2 of them are on their way to get in on the board. And the way it happens is that you can stay there for 7 years. You can only stay there for 7 years. So every year, one will leave and a new one will come in. And that just goes on. And you can only be there for one period. You can only be there for 7 years. The whole thing is without any kind of salary, so it's volunteer work. So the whole idea is that if you go into this, it's because you really want to help the cause of Martinus. And so you can ask, how do you get into the board? And the way it works is that the board, when someone leaves, the board picks a new one. So there are no election or democracy and so forth. And one of the things Martinus wanted to avoid within his work, or all the stuff that we do surrounding his work, was to avoid that we got unfriendly with each other. He says it doesn't really matter whether we can agree on what he's writing and so forth. The most important thing here is that we are friendly. So the whole idea with the way he organized, or ended up structuring and organizing his own things, was essentially to say, hey, if we look around on politics back then and also today, I mean, there are so much noise going on, and people really get unfriendly and don't like each other, right? And he didn't want his work to communicate that to the rest of the world. So this was one way to keep things calm and peaceful. And of course, you can talk about nepotism and those kind of things, but I know some of the people, and I really don't see it. Maybe someone will disagree, but I don't really think that's an issue. But that was his way to keep things quiet, to just say, hey, there are 7 people. They're responsible for everything that goes in with those limited things I talked about: preserving the work, publish, and teaching. That's it, right? So that's the board, and they are responsible for running Martinus Institute, Martinus Client. And then there's one more thing that's called Cosmos Magazine. That's a magazine Martinus also started in the 1930s, and it's been there ever since. And in the beginning, the intention was that was before internet and all that, obviously. So that was the idea, to actually communicate to people who were interested in what happened to the course of Martinus. And you could actually get those magazines, and you could read about it. And Martinus also wrote articles to that, and other people do that as well. I think there are 2 English publications per year right now, and I think you can actually get it for free, and you can probably also read all the old ones. But that's also a part of the whole thing. And of course, with internet and things are changing a bit with that. But it's there. And then I should probably mention Martinus TK. I already did that. You can find a lot of stuff in there as well. You can find the whole work of Martinus in there, as I mentioned in the earlier chapter. It's in there. All the Danish things are in there, and all the translated English is there, and also in other languages as well. And I'm not going to go into all the stuff that is translated, but it's quite a lot of languages it's actually translated to. Not the whole thing, but you can, if you have another language than English, you can probably find something in there. So that was an overview of who Martinus was, his works, some of the things about the organization around it, how that works, how you can get in contact with Martinus and his stuff. And now I'll talk a little bit in part 2 about his world picture and why that's so interesting. So this is the second part of the video, and this is about what the eternal world picture is. So why is this so special? What is it? What is the characteristics of it? What is it can do for you? I will say the eternal world picture is, as it says, about eternal things. And these things are not really things. It's principles, it's functions, it's how the world actually is based on some eternal principles. A world picture is a view on the world. And eternal means that it's there forever. It has never started, and it will never stop. I have a video about it. I will put it up in one of the corners and description. And essentially, eternal is not something that starts or stops. It goes on. It has always been there, and will always be there. So the eternal world picture, that is about these eternal principles, the eternal functionalities that there is in life. And as I described in the first part of the video, Martinus had this intuition where he could actually understand these principles, write them down to us. So that's where it's coming from. Check that part of the video out if you want to know more about that. So there are some fundamental stuff in this, but there are also a lot of practical stuff in the works of Martinus. He writes about society, he writes about what God is, he writes about prayer, food, sexuality. He also goes into some what is electricity, that we might not understand it completely today, what electricity is. So he goes more into those kind of topics. And he also has some more, or maybe it's more of his own thing, like UFOs and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff, and he has written like 300 articles, and the articles are kind of related to more daily stuff. And his main work, the Book of Life, I go to the section about his work if you want to know about that. That's where some of the more eternal principles are, and all the explanations for that. So his work is about these eternal principles, and that's also what I try to convey in my videos. So what I want to say that this is not a new religion or faith or something. It is a science in the sense that you can check it. You can check it with your daily experiences. It's written in a way so you can actually connect to what Martinus writes. If you have the experience, if you don't have it, you just have to wait until you get it. And you can also use your intelligence to actually check what he's writing. So in that sense, it's a science. So that's just one part of what the work of Martinus is. But the actual world picture, what is that? And you can say, you can take this from different angles, but I will say the main message is that there's a good reason to do good. There's actually a logical explanation for you to actually try to do what is good for the person next to you. Neighborly love, your neighbor, the people around you. Martinus extend this neighbor to not just being other humans, it's also animals and plants. So he strongly suggests that we stop eating animals and start being vegetarians, so we don't kill them. That's obviously not lovely for them. It's not a pleasant thing to be killed. He talks about karma, so what we do to other people will come back to us. So obviously, if we start killing other people, maybe we don't do it directly, but if we do it, it will come back to us in some way. And we don't kill the animals. This is just an example of what he's writing about, right? So that's an explanation for that we should do good to the next. That's where we are in a long development as living beings. We have been animals, we have been cruel to each other, and now we have to learn to be good to each other, and there's a good reason for that. So another thing there is to say about the works of Martinus is that he's defining what a living being is. He talks about 3 principles. We have an I, we have an ability to create, and there's the created. That goes for us as people, as humans. But he says that analysis also goes for the whole universe or everything that exists. Everything has something, this I behind it, ready to create. So there's a conscience behind everything that we experience. There's something living that expresses itself. And when there's an expression, there's also a meaning. So he essentially says that everything that is happening has a meaning. So in contrast to a materialistic point of view, where we believe, or where you believe that you start when you're born and you die when you die, and your life starts when you're born and you are gone when you are dead, everything stops. In Martinus' world, we don't start when we get born physically. We have a spiritual life before that, and before that spiritual life we might have other lives. That's called reincarnation. So that's part of this world picture as well, that we get into our physical lives where we learn to become good to each other. That's basically the purpose of our lives right now. So we can become what he calls real human beings, where we have neighborly love as our sort of foundation for living. Where right now we have a little bit of that, but we also have this part where we are what Martinus calls animals, and where we live based on each other or on the expense of other living beings. And another important thing he has is the purpose of darkness. Why do we experience suffering? And he says, long story short, we need to experience darkness because we need contrasts in our life. Without contrast, we don't experience anything. Everything would be one color, one feeling, one of whatever we are talking about, and we wouldn't be able to experience anything. And he essentially says, and this is a very, very short version of it, when we have an eternal life, our life has never started, it will never stop, then we need to renew now and then. And that's part of a bigger plan. I can't go into all the details right now, but essentially the idea with darkness is that we have to renew our consciousness in order to keep living. And we want to do that at some point. Right now it's not very pleasant, but at some point we really wanted it, and now we have had enough of it. It's saturated in some ways, so we want to move on to the next thing where our life is more peaceful. If we think about Vikings, I mean, their paradise was essentially kill and be killed. That's not our paradise anymore. We are into more humane religions, and might have even gone beyond them and gone into how can we actually live a peaceful life. He states what life is, there's purpose, there's a meaning, and he essentially provides us with a solution of the mystery. What is life? Why are we here? What is the purpose of things? So he essentially says there is a purpose. We have to learn to read it. We have to learn to understand it. Enough about Martinus' world picture. I don't know if that made any sense, but if it did, I'm happy. And if not, look at some of my videos. I will definitely go into much more details there and read Martinus' work as well. He has a lot of details as well in there. But what I will say, and what I find quite important, is the tolerance in this work. Martinus stated that his work is a defense for every living being. He explains why we are where we are, that we are very different, but there's a reason for it, and we cannot be any different. So we have to be tolerant towards each other. He shows that we are at a height of our development and we cannot be any better. And it takes a little bit of explanation to get to that point, but I just want to say that if there's nothing else you got out of the second part of the video, the whole tolerance thing is sort of central in all that. So even if you find all of this like, this makes no sense, this is ridiculous, I don't want to read it, I don't want to hear about it, that's fine. That's really not a problem. Go out, find out what you find is good in your life, and do that. And then maybe someday this might be interesting to you, and it will still be here. That was what I had about Martinus, what he has published, a bit about the Martinus course, what the world picture is. I'll put out more videos about Martinus' world picture, not so much about who he was and what is going on around his work, but about the world picture itself. And if you want to follow it, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps out actually, and it actually also just is a pat on the shoulder for me and who is helping out with this YouTube channel. And if you like what you see, please give the video a like. We're really happy to see that as well. And finally, if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below and I'll be happy to answer. And if there's something major that didn't get into this video, who knows, I might make another video. I'll definitely make more videos about the world picture described by Martinus. So stick around, and until next time, thank you.